Every Halloween, the little town of Maplewood came alive with pumpkins on porches, glowing orange lights in windows, and kids in wild costumes. But the real excitement wasn't the candy or the haunted house by the cemetery. No, the true talk of the town was the Halloween masks. These weren't just any masks. They came from Old Man Leroy's Mask Shop, a strange, creaky shop on Maple Street, open only 1 month a year. Everyone in town knew Leroy's masks were different. They were hand-painted, unique, each with its own personality. And they were more than just decoration. They practically became the person wearing them. Every October, kids lined up outside Leroy's shop, chattering about which mask they'd pick. There were masks of every kind. Vampires with piercing red eyes, creepy clowns with wide, twisted grins, werewolves with snarling teeth, even more unusual ones like an owl with golden feathers or a knight with a grim metal face. But no matter how outlandish, each mask looked hauntingly real, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. Now here's where things got interesting. Leroy had one rule, just one, but he repeated it to every single person who bought a mask. Return the mask the morning after Halloween, or it will return to you, one way or another. People laughed it off as just part of the spooky atmosphere, like a story Leroy told to make his mask seem special. But over time, whispers started to spread that it was more than just a story. It began with Tommy Hanks, the scrawny kid from Maple High. Tommy had picked a ghostly white mask with sunken black eyes. He wore it for Halloween and kept it on all night, even after the trick-or-treating. But instead of returning the mask like everyone else, he threw it in his closet and went to bed. The next morning, his mom found him in the kitchen, still wearing the mask, sleeping at the table. When she tried to take it off, Tommy jerked awake, and as the mask slid off, there was a faint, almost invisible outline of the mask's hollow eyes on his face. He denied any memory of it, claiming he hadn't touched the mask since he went to bed. As the days went by, strange things started happening. Tommy would see the mask out of the corner of his eye, lying in places he hadn't put it. Once he found it in his backpack at school. Another time, it was staring at him from the bathroom mirror, waiting. He tried to throw it away, but it kept coming back, each time looking more angry. And Tommy wasn't the only one. Kids who kept the masks began acting differently. Jane, who wore the witch mask, started talking to her reflection, whispering secrets only she could hear. Max, who wore the vampire mask, would sit in dark corners and hiss at his family, bearing fake plastic fangs like they were real. It was like each mask had a mind of its own, whispering to its owner, coaxing them to keep it close. Halloween came and went, but Maplewood didn't feel the same. Parents were on edge, neighbors exchanged nervous glances, and kids started hearing noises at night. The faint shuffling of feet, whispers that faded just as they strained to hear. By Thanksgiving, Old Man Leroy's Mask Shop was the town's only topic of conversation. Leroy had vanished. His shop remained boarded up, as if he'd never been there. Some claimed they saw a shadowy figure walking around inside the closed store at night, but no one dared to check. Then, in December, people began noticing something else. The masks had started to change. Jane's witch mask grew sharper lines, almost as if it had aged, and Max's vampire mask looked hungrier. Tommy's ghost mask had lost its color and turned a sickly, moldy gray. It was as if the masks were becoming a part of them, attaching themselves to the very souls of the wearers. Tommy tried to get rid of it. He threw it in a lake, buried it in the forest, even burned it, but the mask always returned, just a bit more weathered, and each time, with a faint, eerie smile carved into its features. One night, desperate, he sneaked into the library and researched the old town records. What he found chilled him to his core. Old Man Leroy had been a toy maker 100 years ago, known for crafting dolls and masks so lifelike that some people swore they blinked or moved on their own. When his business was failing, he turned to darker arts, desperate to infuse his creations with life, or so the story went. When his shop mysteriously burned down, no one ever saw Leroy again, but his cursed masks were rumored to be hidden somewhere, waiting for new victims. That Halloween, he must have returned. Whether he was a ghost or something even worse, no one knew. But he'd left his mark on Maplewood again, just like he did a century ago. It was too late for Tommy and the others, though. Halloween had come and gone, and they hadn't returned the masks. Each morning they'd wake up, feeling just a little bit less like themselves, a little more empty, as if the masks were draining something from them. By spring, Jane could barely be heard above a whisper. Max never went outside during the day anymore, and Tommy's reflection in the mirror began to look back with an expression that wasn't entirely his own. The town tried to ban Halloween the next year, forbidding any costume shops from setting up, but it didn't help. On October 1st, just like before, a small sign appeared on Maple Street. Old Man Leroy's Mask Shop, open for the season. This time, no one lined up to buy masks. Kids crossed the street, avoiding the shop as if it were haunted. And yet, every so often, they'd find a mask waiting on their doorstep, just lying there like an invitation. The kids knew better now, but it didn't stop the masks from finding new ways to return. To this day, Maplewood tells the tale of Old Man Leroy and his masks. People claim they still see him wandering the streets on Halloween night, holding a basket full of cursed faces, waiting for some curious soul to try one on. And if you ever visit Maplewood on Halloween and hear a soft, ghostly whisper on the wind, don't look back. It's just Leroy, offering you one of his masks. And if you're wise, you'll leave it right where it is, because once you put it on, you might never take it off again. There was something strange about the pumpkin patch on Old Miller's farm. No one could quite put their finger on it, but the air around it always felt different. Folks whispered that the pumpkins in that patch were unlike any others. They grew bigger, rounder, and glowed a faint, unnatural orange, even on the darkest nights. The town kids had a name for it: the Haunted Pumpkin Patch. It all started years ago when Old Miller planted his first seeds. The story goes that he'd wanted to grow the biggest pumpkins in the county. He tried everything: organic soil, special fertilizer, even some bizarre herbal mixtures he'd learned about from a traveling wizard, who was probably just a very creative salesman. But none of it worked. The pumpkins stayed small, sad, and green, far from his dream of bright, enormous giants. One fall evening, frustrated and tired, Miller wandered into the darkest part of the woods. Some say he went there to make a deal, but no one knows exactly what happened. All people know is that when he came back, he was different. His eyes had a far-off look, and his hands were covered in dirt and something that looked like ash. That very night he planted a new batch of seeds, muttering something no one could understand. And from then on, the pumpkin patch was never the same. The pumpkins grew enormous, all right, but they were more than just big. They looked alive. Their skins had patterns, almost like faces, and their shapes weren't quite right. They'd curve and bulge as if something inside them was trying to get out. Kids swore they'd seen the pumpkins move, just a little, when no one was looking. If you stared long enough, you'd feel like they were staring back. Then came the noises. On cool autumn nights, the townfolk could hear faint sounds coming from the patch, whispers, creaks, and sometimes even laughter. Parents told their kids to stay away, but of course, that just made them want to go even more. It became a sort of town challenge. Go into the patch at night and pick the biggest pumpkin you could find. But no one ever actually dared to take one home. One October, a group of kids, Tommy, Lucy, Sam, and Joe, decided it was time to solve the mystery once and for all. They met at dusk, each carrying a flashlight and feeling braver than they should have. As they approached the patch, a chill ran through the air. The wind seemed to die down, and everything went eerily quiet, as if the patch itself was holding its breath. They pushed open the rusty gate and stepped inside. Pumpkins of every size and shape surrounded them, casting long shadows under the setting sun. Tommy pointed to a massive pumpkin right in the middle, its surface covered in strange bumps and lines that looked suspiciously like a scowling face. "That's the one," he said, grinning. "Let's go check it out." But as they walked closer, the ground beneath them felt soft, almost squishy, as if they were walking on a giant sponge. Lucy shivered, whispering, "Is it just me? Or does it feel like we're being watched?" Joe laughed nervously. "It's just pumpkins. They can't watch anything." But even he didn't sound convinced. Finally, they reached the giant pumpkin. It was huge, easily twice the size of any pumpkin they'd ever seen. Sam reached out and tapped it. The pumpkin made a hollow sound, echoing through the patch. Suddenly, the kids heard a faint whisper, like the sound of someone trying to speak from far, far away. Did you guys hear that?" Lucy whispered. The others nodded, eyes wide. "Maybe it's just the wind," Joe said. though he sounded less sure with every passing second. But then the pumpkin shivered. It was as if it was breathing. They jumped back, staring at the massive gourd with a mix of awe and horror. Without warning, a deep voice boomed from somewhere in the patch. "Who dares disturb the Pumpkin King?" The kids froze. There was no one else around, just them, and hundreds of pumpkins staring at them with their strange, twisted faces. "Run!" Tommy yelled, and they took off, weaving between the pumpkins as fast as their legs could carry them. But as they ran, the pumpkins seemed to close in, as if the patch itself was alive. They could feel the pumpkins watching, laughing, even whispering secrets to one another. The ground felt softer, stickier, almost like hands grabbing at their feet. Finally, they burst out of the patch and didn't stop running until they were halfway home. Breathless and terrified, they collapsed on the sidewalk, looking back at the dark outline of the patch. None of them spoke for a long time. The next day, rumors spread that old Miller had been spotted wandering the streets, holding a pumpkin and muttering to himself. No one knew where he'd come from or how he'd disappeared, but the whispers said that he wasn't quite himself. His eyes had an orange glow, just like the pumpkins. From then on, the kids kept their distance from the patch, but every Halloween, they'd hear stories about other kids who dared to go in. Each one claimed to see strange faces, hear laughter, and feel something watching them. Some even swore that when they tried to pick a pumpkin, it moved. And as the legend grew, it was said that if you stayed in the patch too long, you might just turn into a pumpkin yourself, joining the haunted harvest forever. So every Halloween, the townsfolk would gather around a bonfire, sharing tales of the haunted patch and warning the younger kids to stay away. But the lure of the pumpkins was too strong. Each year, new kids would try their luck, sneaking into the patch, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Pumpkin King and daring to pick the biggest pumpkin they could find. And old Miller? Well, some say he still roams the town, especially on cold October nights, looking for the perfect pumpkin to take home. You'll know him if you see him. He's the one with the glowing orange eyes and the faint smell of pumpkin spice in the air. And if you're very unlucky, he just might offer you a pumpkin. But whatever you do, don't accept it, because once you're part of the haunted patch, there's no turning back. The story has passed through generations, and people still whisper about it on chilly Halloween nights. Parents tell their kids to stay away from the patch, to pick their pumpkins anywhere else but there. But every Halloween, without fail, the legend lives on. The pumpkins grow a little bigger, a little brighter, and the patch waits, patient and hungry, for the next brave soul who can't resist the call of the haunted harvest. And if you find yourself in Maplewood this Halloween, take my advice. Enjoy the costumes, eat all the candy you want. But whatever you do, don't go to the pumpkin patch, because if you listen closely, you might just hear them whispering, calling you to join them, to come closer, to pick just one. The old Halloween costume shop on Maple Street wasn't just creepy, it was downright spooky. The place had been around forever, its faded orange sign creaking in the wind, the letters barely legible after years of wear and tear. And it didn't help that the shop always looked abandoned. Most days it was closed, dark, and silent, with dusty windows showing only shadows of strange costumes and props inside. But every October, like magic, it would open, and strange things started happening. The kids in town had endless rumors about the shop. They said that costumes there weren't just costumes. They had a way of changing people. You didn't just dress up, you became whatever you wore. Kids swore that every Halloween, someone would get a costume from the old shop and end up acting a little too real. The pirate costume turned someone into a sneaky trickster, the witch hat made another kid into a potion-mixing maniac, and that old werewolf suit, it made the wearer howl at the moon, growling and scratching like a real wolf. One Halloween, Max and his friends dared each other to go inside the shop. Max wasn't scared of much, but something about the place made him uneasy. Still, he didn't want his friends to think he was a chicken, so he put on his bravest face and stepped through the heavy, creaky door. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the place had the strong, musty smell of old fabric and something faintly metallic, like old pennies. The costumes were all over the place, piled on shelves, draped over chairs, and even hanging from the ceiling. There were rows and rows of outfits, masks, hats, wigs, and props. Some costumes looked so old they might fall apart if touched. while others looked brand new, almost as if they were waiting for someone to wear them. Max picked up a vampire cape. The fabric was thick, heavy, and had a strange smell that reminded him of something irony. He felt a shiver but brushed it off, telling himself it was just his imagination. His friend Lucy found an old pirate hat with a faded feather, while Sam picked up a skeleton mask, with hollow eyes and a grin that was a little too wide. They laughed, trying on hats and holding up masks, each one trying to look scarier than the last. But then Max noticed a strange costume in the corner of the room. It was a jester outfit, with bright red and black fabric, little bells on the hat, and a mask with a creepy smile that seemed a little too happy. He couldn't explain it, but something about that jester costume felt wrong. The smile was frozen in place, the eyes hollow and dark, but it was like they were watching him, waiting for him to come closer. Against his better judgment, Max stepped forward and reached out to touch it. As soon as his fingers brushed the fabric, a chill shot up his arm. Suddenly, he heard a voice, a quiet, whispering voice that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, all at once. "Wear it," the voice hissed, low and tempting. Max jumped back, looking around, but his friends didn't seem to notice. They were still playing around with costumes, laughing and talking, oblivious to the strange whisper. Max shook his head, telling himself he was just being paranoid. But then he felt it again, that strange pull toward the jester outfit. The costume seemed to move slightly, swaying just enough to catch his eye again. The bells on the hat jingled softly, though there was no breeze. Against his better judgment, Max picked up the jester mask and put it on, just for a second. The second the mask touched his face, everything changed. It was like he'd stepped into another world, one where he wasn't Max anymore. He was the jester. His friends looked different too. Lucy's laugh sounded distorted, echoing in his ears, while Sam's skeleton mask seemed to take on a life of its own, grinning wider and wider. He felt his body move on its own, doing an exaggerated dance like a puppet on strings. And then he heard it. The laughter. Deep, eerie laughter that didn't belong to him, but was coming from his own mouth. Lucy and Sam stopped laughing, staring at Max with wide eyes. "Max, what are you doing?" Lucy asked, her voice trembling. Max tried to answer, but he couldn't control his mouth. All that came out was more laughter, high-pitched and wild. He felt his hands move without his control, doing strange, jerky gestures as if he were putting on a show. Suddenly, the shop door creaked open, and an old man stepped in. He wore a long black coat and had a face that looked like it had seen too many Halloweens. His eyes were sharp, glinting in the dim light as he looked straight at Max. "Ah, the jester suit. Haven't seen anyone brave enough to wear that one in years," he said with a chuckle. The old man walked over, his footsteps slow and deliberate, and placed a wrinkled hand on Max's shoulder. Max felt a jolt, and suddenly he could move again. He ripped the mask off, his heart pounding. The old man gave him a knowing smile. "Some costumes in here are more than fabric and thread, you know. They hold memories. Wear them long enough, and you might just take on more than the look." Max swallowed, backing away. He looked at his friends, who seemed as terrified as he felt. The old man's smile didn't waver. "I think it's time you kids left," he said, waving a hand toward the door. "Not all costumes are meant to be worn after all." The kids didn't need to be told twice. They bolted out the door, not stopping until they were far away from the shop. Max's heart was still racing as he glanced back at the building. The old man stood in the window, holding the jester mask, his eyes watching them go. And as they hurried down the street, they heard a faint jingling of bells, as if someone, or something, was laughing in the distance. From that night on, Max and his friends never went back to the costume shop on Maple Street. They'd walk by sometimes, daring each other to go inside, but none of them ever had the courage. Halloween costumes were fun, sure, but there was something about the old shop that they couldn't shake. Because deep down, they knew that those costumes weren't just for dress-up. They were something else, something that seemed to remember the people who wore them. And every Halloween, as the town's kids picked out their costumes, the story of the haunted costume shop grew. Kids would dare each other to peek inside, to try on the jester suit, or to see if the old man was still there. Some swore they saw him, watching from the window, holding the mask with that same unsettling grin. But no one was brave enough to actually go in. The shop stayed quiet, dark, and mysterious, as if waiting for the next curious soul who wanted more than just a costume. Someone willing to take on the memories, the whispers, and the haunting laughter that came with it. And if you ever find yourself in town on Halloween, maybe you'll be brave enough to step inside. Just remember, not every costume is meant for fun, and sometimes, when you put one on, it might just put you on too.